For a $240 gaming PC, this is actually handling Linux gaming really well. And with that console interface, this would make a great little 1080p living room gaming setup. And overall, it's really hard to beat what we're doing here at 1080p for the price. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be putting together a $240 gaming PC, and with this, we're actually going to be running Linux on it. But keep in mind, if you didn't want to go with Linux, you could always install Windows. But with this setup here, I wanted more of a console interface, so I'm going to be using Bazzite. This will be more of a living room gaming PC. That way you can just turn it on, use a controller for everything, and start playing your favorite games. Now, it is totally possible to put this together for $240, and in some cases, you actually might be able to get out cheaper. For the base of this unit, I'm using an HP Pavilion with a Ryzen 5 3500. It's actually just a 6-core 3rd gen Ryzen CPU, and I picked this up on eBay for $168 with 16 gigs of RAM and a 512GB M.2 SSD. And I'll give you a little bit of a backstory on these pavilions. A few years ago, these were absolutely everywhere. You could buy them from Sam's Club, you could buy them from Walmart for a pretty decent deal at the time, given that part supply was very, very scarce. Basically, people bought these up, pulled the GPUs, sold the GPUs on eBay for more than they were worth, and then tried to sell the base PC without a GPU. Well, they're still everywhere. If you head over to eBay right now, there's hundreds of them listed. Now, there are some up for like $600, which is absolutely ridiculous. But take a look for the ones without a GPU, and you can get a pretty decent deal. Wait for the bid out or send over a best offer, and you can definitely pick one of these up for pretty cheap. So now that we've got the base of the build covered, case, power supply, CPU, cooler, RAM, and storage, it's time to move over to some upgrades, because when you pick one of these up, chances are you're not going to get a GPU with it. Now, I did want to add a little more RAM. This came with 16 gigs, single stick, so I'm just going to add another 4 gigs, bringing it up to 20 and making it a dual channel setup. And since I'm going to be turning this into a Linux gaming machine, I wanted to go the AMD route, but I didn't want to spend much money, so I opted to use the Radeon RX 590. You could also go with the 580 if you want to. Again, these are dirt cheap on eBay. We've got 8 gigs of VRAM here. I got mine for $68 shipped, and I've seen some lower, I've seen some higher, and even that RX 580 with 8 gigs is going to perform about the same as this RX 590. So I did clean the CPU fan off here, but I didn't wipe the whole unit down. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any dust there blocking the airflow. You can add a 3.5-inch drive right here with this bracket. I just wanted to get this out of the way so we could get to that RAM. I'm just adding an extra 4 gigs here, and this does have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth already ready to go. I've tested it with Bazzite Linux, and the chip here for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is working without any kind of configuration. Now we're up to 20 gigs of RAM, and I really wasn't worried about the extra 4 gigs. It's more of just making this a dual channel setup. These pavilions do come with an 8-pin PCIe connector right there on that power supply, so adding a GPU that requires that is really easy. We don't need to do anything else to this PSU. And whether you go with an RX 590 or RX 580, you're going to need that extra PCIe connector. I've got an ASRock RX 590 right here. A lot of the ones that I've seen, at least the 590s, are from XFX. They're over on eBay. We do need to angle this in here just right. I'm just going to go ahead and get this slotted down. We'll plug in that 8-pin connector. And I'll tell you, when buying used parts, it is good practice to go through, clean everything up, replace the thermal paste. But, this is a $240 PC. I want to see how it performs, so I'm just going to kind of wing it here. I'm sure cooling could be increased by replacing that thermal paste on the CPU and GPU here, but I still think we're going to see some pretty decent performance. The interior on this thing wasn't as dusty as I thought it would be. I did wipe off the CPU cooler fan just to make sure we got enough airflow there, but it looks pretty decent. You can go through, clean it up if you need to. But like I mentioned, we're going to be running Linux on this machine instead of Windows, and installing Windows is easy enough. But I wanted that Steam Deck interface, and for this, I'm going to be using Bazzite OS. I've made several videos showing this operating system off on handhelds and other PCs. It's based on Fedora, and with this, we do get that full Steam Deck interface. Super easy to install. You're going to grab a USB drive. You could even flash it from another hard drive if you wanted to. What hardware are you using? We're going with the desktop here. Select your primary GPU, AMD. Desktop environment, I'm going to go with KDE, but you could go with GNOME if you want to. And yeah, we definitely want that Steam Deck interface. We'll just download the image, flash it to a USB drive using something like Etcher, and install it on the PC. I've already installed the operating system on that M.2 SSD that came with this unit. Got a little green light up front here, not RGB, but there is a little bit of LED action going on. And this should boot right into our gamepad UI mode, or big picture mode, or Steam Deck mode, whatever you want to call it. I do have a Steam controller. I'm not a huge fan of it, so I'm going to be using an Xbox controller. I've also got a keyboard and mouse plugged in, that way I can navigate the desktop interface. But yeah, so far, looking pretty good. I just went ahead and connected this to my game capture so we could get a better look at everything. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, it looks just like the Steam Deck would, and we've got access to all of the nice little goodies that the Steam Deck has. Right now, I am at 120 hertz. My game capture is set at 60. While I'm gaming, I will have this unlocked, so we can definitely see how far we can take this machine. I'm using an Xbox controller, and with this, if you press the Xbox and the A button at the same time, it'll bring up our menu. Everything here is working. We've got Wi-Fi. This did come with the Wi-Fi chip. If you end up picking one of these up without a GPU, pretty sure they're not going to pull the Wi-Fi out. If they do, you could always use Ethernet. Bluetooth. We've got access to the performance overlay right here. I'm just going to put it right here so we can see the screen. Moving down, we can disable that frame limit, enable HDR, allow tearing. And I'm not sure if this TDP limit is really working. I've messed with it just a bit. 277 watts definitely seems excessive for that RX 590, but I've just left this off. Manual GPU clock here doesn't do anything. Scaling mode, we can fit, stretch, fill. We can also enable FSR from here. System is pretty snappy the way it is. I mean, we're not working with super high-end parts here, but if we move into the settings here, I'll show you. Using Bazzite. AMD Ryzen 5 3500, 6 cores, no extra threads, up to 4.1. 20 gigs of RAM. This did come with that 16 gig stick, but I just added an extra 4 gig stick here to bring it up and run in dual channel. Actually really cheap over on eBay. And of course, we've got that AMD Radeon RX 590 with 8 gigs of VRAM. So far, pretty happy with the experience. And with Bazzite, we do have access to desktop. From our power settings, we can always switch over to desktop mode, so you could use this just like any other Linux PC. But really, I put this together for gaming, and with these parts here, I'm really interested to see what this thing is going to do with these games. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And the first one here, we'll just go with Cyberpunk 2077. Alright, so here's Cyberpunk 2077, high settings, 1080p, and with that high preset, it does automatically set FSR to quality. I think we may need to go to balanced or even just take it down to medium settings. If you take a look at that FPS, we are right there under 60, and I kind of figured that would be the case with this older RX 590. So we're going to head into the settings, just give you a look here. High preset, quality FSR, 1080p. What I'm going to do here is just take FSR from quality to balanced, and I think that's really going to help out here. And now, instead of running at an average of around 56 FPS, it looks like we're up in the high 60s, mid 70s here. And I know there's some people out there that just don't like FSR, but what we're working with here is a $240 PC using an older RX 590 GPU. So adding a little bit of resolution scale is kind of going to be a must. Now, if you really don't want to have to use FSR, you could actually go ahead and just lock this down at 45 FPS. But if you want to get at 60 or over that 60 hump, this is exactly what we're going to have to do, at least with Cyberpunk 2077. Next on the list, we've got Ratchet and Clank, Rift Apart, 1080p, medium, FSR is set to balanced, and I didn't have to enable frame gen here. Now with these same settings, turning on frame gen from within the game itself will net us over 100 FPS. But given that we're running at an average of around 74 FPS, we really don't need it. And I mean, if you really wanted that extra, you could use it. But it's fully playable like this, and of course we are at medium. Personally, I still think it looks good here at 1080, even with FSR set to balanced. Here's The Witcher 3, 1080p, medium settings, and to tell you the truth, I thought we'd see better performance out of this. If you take a look over on the left-hand side there, we're actually seeing an average of around 71 FPS. At high with no resolution scale, it does kind of dip under. I actually figured we'd be able to go into this game at high settings, no problem at all, given the age. But CD Projekt Red did do a bunch of updates to this game, and now from within the settings, we can use FSR if we want to. I just wanted to go in here without it, and yeah, I mean, it just seems like it would be much better on this RX 590. Kingdom Hearts 3, maxed out settings, 1080p resolution with no scaling. I knew going into this we'd see some pretty decent performance, and right now I am connected to a 120Hz monitor. Unfortunately, with these settings, we can't just get that steady 120 out of it, but locking this down at 60, you're still going to have a really good time with this game. One thing I need to mention here is with a Linux operating system like we're using right now, there are a couple games, especially the Bethesda games that have recently been updated, where we just don't have access to any of the settings. Basically, when we download the game, Steam is detecting that we're downloading it on a Steam Deck, so it's going to give us that version. And with that version, we've got a preset resolution and the settings are already mapped for us. So every time I do this, I always forget about it until I get into game. You can see the black bars on the side. But it does run at a constant 60 FPS. Shadow of the Tomb Raider built-in benchmark, 1080p, high settings. Just let this go through. I wanted to see if we had any kind of weird bugs. Recently, I did a little bit of testing, and with another system, I had some really weird bugs, even just in the benchmark. It went through just fine first time I ran it, and we got an average of 77 FPS. Big City, Little Kitty, I've personally been having a lot of fun with this game, so I figured I'd just throw it in, and I knew we'd be able to run this no problem at all, 1080p, maxed out. With this game here, I did run into some really weird graphical glitches. If you take a look at the horse, his tail is kind of straight up there, and it looks like my bow is around my feet when I'm walking around. Now, it didn't affect gameplay, it was just really weird glitches going on. And right now, we are at 1080p medium settings with no FSR. But we do have access to FSR 3.1, so we're going to take it to quality. And now we're seeing an average of around 71 FPS with this game. Another thing you might notice here is with this guy that I'm about to encounter, he has no legs. So there's definitely some odd stuff going on with this game, given that we're using an older GPU here. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that we do have access to a desktop mode here with Bazzite, and I wanted to show that off here because there are people out there that, have a single PC. So if you did pick something like this up, it could very well be your only PC that you have. And, having a dedicated gaming setup is awesome, but there's other things that we do on our PC, be it school, work, or even media playback. So from right here, we can switch to desktop. And I really like what the developers have done here because the first time you boot into this, you'll be greeted with setting up Bazzite. So for instance, something like Decky Loader, plugin installer for the Steam Deck or a Steam Deck menu, because we're working on a PC here. EMU Deck for emulation. There's lots of different apps that we can pick and choose directly from the setup wizard. But other than that, we do have access to Discover just like we would on the Steam Deck. So let's say we wanted to install a photo editor. We've got GIMP right here. We can go ahead and install it. And with a little machine like this, we've got plenty of power for web browsing, email checking, document editing. Even something like 4K video playback isn't going to be an issue with this setup. And of course, if you ended up putting a PC like this together, you don't have to install Linux on it. I just kind of like having that Steam Deck interface, kind of a living room PC. If you wanted to, you could always go with Windows. And, if you're interested, I could do a Windows video with this PC. So let me know in the comments below. I'd actually be interested to see what kind of performance we're getting over there. In the end, I think we're actually seeing some pretty decent performance for the price paid, and yeah, you can definitely pick up parts like this for this price. You might even be able to get out cheaper. It just really comes down to those bids and best offers. Sometimes you'll find a ton of these PCs listed on eBay. Sometimes you'll find one or two of them listed at $600. Definitely don't even click on it. But if you're patient and set notifications up on eBay for what you're looking for, you can definitely put something like this together. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. I will leave links in the description to all the parts I used. I'll also leave some links to Bazzite's website. Really easy to install. You're going to do it just like any other operating system from a USB drive. If you do end up putting one of these together, maybe even use just a different base PC, let us know the parts you used in the comments below and what operating system you're running. But that's it for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.